Agay. Last year, I made a video for Pride talking about how musicals had helped me realize my sexuality, while also being in the closet as a little trans gal, which is pretty funny when you think about it. I'd like to speak about that from the other perspective that I can give. As a trans gal in the UK, there's a lot of general transphobia around. There's a lot of TERFs. There's a lot of famous children's authors, and obviously theatre still has a long way to go. However, I must admit, in the past year or so, we have seen a lot more visible trans casting. I'm going to talk about the shows I've seen and tell you how they felt and how they affected me. Now, I'm going to do this since coming out. I could also talk about Fun Home, Kinky Boots, all of these shows that did show queer representation, non-binary, gay and drag queens. That's more covered in my past video. If you'd like me to discuss more about sexuality and how these kind of helped me realize that, that's your video for you. Let's talk about Bring It On. Last year in December, I was starting to really come to grips with who I was. I'd pretty much stopped making videos because I knew that it wasn't me anymore. But I was still getting invited to press things, and I was very happily saying yes. Because, I still enjoyed a bit of theatre, even though I was kind of worried to make videos. I guess that's what I'll say. I wasn't sure about coming out on YouTube at that point, and I wasn't sure how to do it, so I didn't. This production of Bring It On was honestly robbed. It was a really good production, and then they, due to different reasons, due to, COVID and all of that, they didn't get to go on their full UK tour, but I did manage to go see it at the South Bank. In this production, there is a trans performer playing a trans role. This was one of the first times, I think maybe even the first time, that I had seen a trans person playing a trans person on stage. It was beautiful, It meant a lot. Seeing someone like me play a role like me. When you're watching a performance of a trans person who isn't being played by a trans person, yes, it's still representation, but it's different because you know that this isn't a trans person. This is someone pretending to be a trans person. There's a lot of arguments online where people are like, oh, it's acting. It's acting. People can act. Are you saying that people can't act? And that's not the point. For me, as a trans person, the fact of the matter is that we don't have a lot of representation. The biggest films, the biggest musicals, they don't often feature a lot of trans people. So when these parts come around, when these musicals are finally made and finally include trans people within the story, the fact that they are sometimes, and thankfully we are getting better at this and we're seeing it happen a lot less and less, but the fact that they are not being played by trans people is defeating, because I know that that's not a trans person. I know that that's not proper representation for me. It's so different when they are being played by a trans person, because you feel proud of that person. You feel seen a lot more. For a community that's always being beaten down and told that our identity is not real or not seen, to see someone who is like us on stage being free and being expressive of who they are, that's what matters. We could talk about Cabaret. Cabaret is one of the most talked about musicals at the moment. It is massive. Everyone's talking about it. The ticket prices are off the charts. Everyone wants to go see Cabaret. And the chorus is filled with non-binary performers and trans performers being seen in equal ways in the cast. Cabaret is all about blurring gender. There's a lot in there that kind of goes against society's general ideas of male and female and what's between, and this binary was broken down a lot of the time. Just as it's done in drag, it's broken down and was broken down in 1920s, 1930s clubs in Berlin. So to have a production of Cabaret reflect this a lot with a modern idea of breaking down gender, binaries with casting trans and non-binary performers is brilliant. Seeing these performers get to shine and add that queer edge to Cabaret, that kind of grunge, that kind of energy behind Cabaret, and the kind of almost like dirty, gritty Cabaret scene. It's beautiful. It's so queer. It's so elegant. And oh, I love it. I love it so much. Then we can talk about something like Legally Blonde. The production of Legally Blonde at the Open Air Theatre has kind of split audiences a little bit, but overall, it's Legally Blonde. How could you go wrong? And it has to be respected for how strong its cast is. Being diverse in the way of casting a mixture of different cultures and races, and obviously, as I'm focusing on this video, a lot of non-binary and trans people in roles that weren't originally written for non-binary and trans people. Enid Hoops being played by someone who's non-binary, having a gender-fluid Delta Nu within the chorus, a trans woman in the chorus understudying some of the bigger roles as well. This representation is important, and to have it in a show that's not originally written for a trans performer is amazing, because a lot of the time, as I said at the start, we're told that we're not allowed to play these roles. To have these performers on stage be authentically themselves and be authentically trans in roles that weren't designed for them is power. It's beautiful. And as I keep coming back to, it's fulfilling to see. And I guess we can talk about what's next. What would I like to see next? And I think a lot of these examples are very modern, and they're very centered around shows that make sense to have trans people in. Legally Blonde at the Open Air Theatre is set in modern day. They've updated it, so obviously it makes sense to have a lot of non-binary and trans people in it, because a lot more people are feeling more open about coming out now. It makes sense to have non-binary and trans performers in a production of Cabaret, which is set in a place where it was really open to be gay, be trans, be non-binary, even if the terminology was a little bit different. What I'd like to see is a lot more shows adopting an open trans casting, even if they're not set in the modern day. It doesn't matter if they're playing a role that is meant to be cisgender, because they're just playing the gender that they are. I'd love to see more musicals written to reflect a trans cast as well. More musicals being given a chance to take up bigger and bigger stages, having a strong centre on trans characters, not just in the background, not just the side characters, but main characters as well. Because if we look at the West End and we look at Broadway, there are very few musicals and plays that are being pushed up that have parts specifically written for trans and non-binary people. The only ones that come to mind are Anne Juliet, and then because we literally had to yell at them and say, hey, it's not cool that you've cut out your one non-binary person, kind of Jagged Little Pill, but that's very controversial. Other than that, there's very few examples of shows with big leading parts for trans people. That's why it hurts so much when big producers kind of gatekeep trans people from being in their shows, saying, oh, that's a different type of show, or I wouldn't do it because, you should be playing in a modern show. It doesn't make sense for you to be in a historical show, because there are none. There are so few examples of big shows being pushed towards the West End that are very open to casting trans people. And as a person who is trans, who loves to go see the theatre, who goes to see the theatre, see art on stage and to see different parts of society reflected, to not see yourself there as much as you maybe should see yourself is disheartening. If there had been more examples of non-binary people in shows, of trans people in shows, I would have realised this about myself a lot sooner. I kind of hid myself away from it. I kind of didn't want to address it and pretend it wasn't there, because all of the examples of trans people that I was being given were negative. I was given a lot of negative energy from family members about trans people, and the media wasn't showing trans people at all. A different perspective and a different outlook would have saved me a lot of time hiding who I was or not quite realizing who I was. The only thing you can hope for is that it gets better. That it gets better for the people after you. And that's what I hope. I hope that, you know, as more of us younger people, and even younger than me, start, you know, being free to come out and feel a lot less scared about doing so, and we're getting more and more of these positive representations in the media, that a lot more trans people will realise who they are, and we won't have to go through a lot of the troubles and a lot of the self-hatred that I had to go through. I hope everyone had a good Pride Month. If you did enjoy this video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps out the channel. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, gay!